Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this first NAViGO virtual AGM. And for those of you who have not met me, I'm Tom Hunter, and I'm privileged to be the chair of NAViGO. My job today is to look after today's agenda and hopefully keep us on track for the afternoon. So, here we are together again, the NAViGO family, our service users, staff, carers, volunteers, and the many organisations who support us throughout the year. We are broadcasting this AGM from the newly refurbished ground floor of NAViGO House, which will open next week to accommodate our open mind service. And it's a wonderful refurbishment. I look back to our first AGM held on the 28th of September 2011, which we held here in the ground floor of NAViGO House when it was the original Tuke's base. So how ironical it is that here we are 9 years later in the same building, in fact, in the very same room, but in very different and strange circumstances. Over those years, it is truly amazing to see how we have grown and developed as an organisation. We began in 2011 with 500 staff and a revenue budget of about 20 million. We now employ 650 staff and have a £30 million turnover. Over the past 6 months, the NHS has taken on the biggest challenge of its 72-year history. The global COVID-19 pandemic has resulted in unprecedented action being taken across the nation as a whole, and has placed all organisations like ours under unprecedented pressure. Here at NAViGO, we've responded to the challenges presented by the pandemic to maintain safe services for both our service users and our staff. All of our staff have been incredibly flexible and creative from the beginning of the pandemic, organising new ways of working, undertaking different roles and responsibilities, working from home, and generally supporting each other. Our continued delivery of safe care for our service users has only been possible with the enthusiasm, dedication, and compassion of our outstanding staff. So, to each and every person who has joined us in the fight against COVID-19, I simply say, thank you. Thank you for taking on the challenge. Thank you for going that extra mile. Thank you for being part of Team NAViGO. The progress we have made since 2011 is truly remarkable. And as I said when I started speaking, I feel privileged to have been part of that journey and the success all of you have made of NAViGO. We've had another most successful year, as Jane will highlight in her presentation shortly, as we continue to stay true to our principles in looking after people as individuals, treating them with care and compassion, and as our logo says, delivering services we'd be happy for our family to use. So I thank you all. So moving on to the agenda. There are some formal bits we have to get through today. So we'll begin by taking the minutes of the previous meeting held on the 24th of September 2019. And these are being displayed on our website, and I will take them as read and approved. So moving on to the next item on our agenda is to consider our annual review, and I will ask Jane Lewington, our Chief Executive, to come and present her review of the year.
Be with you in a minute, chaps. I've been given instructions on my steps I've got to do before I start, so I'm following my instructions, so bear with me. Right, now this is going to be really quite strange to do, Because normally when you give a presentation, you can actually see the presentation in front of you, but today I can't. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to keep looking down because I've got a copy of the presentation in front of me. So just bear with me today. It is very, very different. So I think it's fair to say that the annual review of 1920 is very much a tale of two halves. And as Tom's already referenced, the significant challenge that we had towards the end of 1920 with the coronavirus pandemic. But we actually did have a plan before that, and it's difficult sometimes to remember that we had a plan for 1920. So I am going to spend some time talking about some of the original objectives that we had and the progress that we've made, as well as then, of course, talking about what's been happening since March 2020. So, Brad, if we can move on to the slide, whoever's doing, or Ebony, of the 5 membership objectives. Is it Ebony controlling the slides? Marvellous. Right, so the 5 membership objectives that were set by our members for 1920 had 5 key themes. And it's interesting, every time I do this presentation at the annual review, there isn't much movement or change actually amongst the things that are seen as important by our members. So the first theme was around to continue to develop our services, and that's very much going to be the focus of my presentation, what we're doing in each of our service areas to develop and move things on. Developing our workforce always features in terms of what's important to our members, and there will be many examples of training and development in my presentation today. Making sure that we engage our stakeholders and encourage participation, and using our communications and marketing team to support that, as well as our staff who work with our volunteers and with our groups. And I think it's fair to say that communications and marketing have played a fundamental role this year, both pre and post-pandemic. And finally, estates and environment, continuing to improve the buildings that we use and deliver high quality environments remains stronger, really important to our members. Thanks, Ebony. So our first service that I want to look at in detail is developing our Open Minds service. Obviously, for Open Minds, one of the key drives is around increasing the number of people that can access support for help with common mental health problems such as anxiety and depression. So every year, we're set a target to increase the number of people who can access that service. And I'm pleased to say that in 1920, despite the pandemic, we actually overachieved against the target set by NHS England in terms of the number of people that we supported. But even better than that, not only did we increase the number of people that we saw, we also helped more people to recover. So over 50% of the people who engaged with the service, we could demonstrate were on their road to real recovery by the time of their end of their engagement with the service. Because we need to see more people, we need more staff, and every year we get more money from the CCG, and this year was no exception, and we appointed 3 extra trainees within Open Minds. And the long-term conditions team played a key role in achieving that increase in the number of people that we see, and they had a 24% increase in referrals to their team last year. And the final thing I want to talk about in terms of Open Minds is actually where I'm stood today. So a lot of the planning and a lot of the work around the relocation for Open Minds to NAViGO House was actually completed in 1920. And for those of you who are familiar with the ground floor of NAViGO House, when you do actually get to come here, you will not literally recognise the place. It looks totally different, and it's going to provide an excellent environment for this service. Thanks, Ebony. So moving on to our other community services, there are a few areas I want to cover here. Autism and ADHD, a new service that started back in November 18. And when they started, they had a 2-year waiting list, for assessment of autism. They have now got that waiting list down to 3 months, which complies with the National NICE guidance. And that is a tremendous achievement by that new team. Similarly, another new service, the Perinatal Mental Health Service, have had their first full year. They were officially launched. They've held service user participation groups supported by Mind, and are getting some really good feedback from the women accessing that service. And like Open Minds, again, it's a service where we need to be seeing more and more people each year. Early intervention, our early intervention team continue to perform extremely well. And in the National Clinical Audit of Psychosis, they were rated as top performing. But not only that, in the Children and Young People Mental Health Awards, they also won the award for Best Transition from CAMS. And on the back of additional funding we managed to secure from the CCG, we've appointed a new clinical lead, Dr. Lawati, for the service, and I'm sure is going to build that service and continue to develop it as we look at pathways for young people right up to the age of 25. Work in our community mental health teams continues with their focus on recovery and their work towards accreditation with the Royal College of Psychiatry. In assertive outreach, they've been looking at the development of their practitioners, and now 2 of their practitioners have been trained in behavioural family therapy, extending the range of therapies that they can provide to their service users. And we can't talk about community services without talking about WISE, our physical health service, who really focus on improving the physical health of all of our service users who have serious mental illness. And once again, they've been recognised externally for the work that they do, and were highly commended at the Positive Practice in Mental Health Awards this year. Moving on to older people's services, quite a bit to talk about here because this isn't just our inpatient service, it's also the community services as well. And I'm going to continue on a theme around development of our practitioners. So we talked about workforce was really one of our key priorities this year, and that's certainly evidenced by the development work that's been done within teams. So within older people's, 3 staff within the community have completed their first year of their advanced clinical practitioner course, with a further 2 to enrol this year. We have our first ever nurse consultant in NAViGO, Freedom Nokido, and she's done that through the ACP route, and she's a non-medical prescriber, an approved and responsible clinician. That's a fantastic achievement, and we need more nurse consultants in NAViGO. 2 staff have completed master's degrees, 1 in neuropsychology and 1 in neuropsychiatry, and 3 more practitioners are undertaking the postgraduate certificate at Bradford around a special interest in dementia that helps streamline our dementia diagnosis process. So lots of developments going on in terms of individuals within older people's, but also they've been developing their services. When I stood here last year, the Janine Smith Suite hadn't been open very long. It certainly wasn't full. It's full now. In fact, it's more than full. We have a waiting list for the Janine Smith Suite. And such has been the success of the complex care that they're delivering. And we want to look at what next. One of the things that we'll be looking to develop are step-down beds from the Janine Smith Suite so that we can offer more care for people with complex needs. In terms of our acute older people services, the home treatment team is now fully integrated back with older people's, and they've been providing training and support to Sussex House to support the provision of crisis beds. Older people's are very much leading the way in terms of how we want to work much more closely with primary care in the future. And so they've aligned their teams and their staff to the 3 primary care networks within North East Lincolnshire. That includes their care home support team, the new staff who will be pointing to our mental health liaison service as we extend it to 24-hour provision. So that's our advanced clinical practitioners and the Admiral nurses. And they've aligned their functional and memory teams as well to the PCNs. And that's a theme that's going to affect all of our services as we move forward over the next few years. Our older people's service continued to gain external recognition. Janine Smith herself has been awarded a merit award by the Royal College of Occupational Therapy for her in special recognition of her contribution to the OT profession. And we have 2 shortlisted nominees for the Nursing Times Awards, Freedom as Nurse Leader of the Year and Konar for the Care of Older People Award, and we wish them well. So what's next in older people's? Well, I've talked about the step-down beds, but they're also looking to provide crisis support at the weekend from the conservatory at the Gardeners. Thank you. So moving on to our adult acute services, Safe Space has played a key role over the last year as part of our crisis pathway, and that carried through into the period of COVID. They went virtual. They've now moved back to a hybrid model where they see some service users face-to-face, particularly new service users, while supporting others virtually, and it continues to go from strength to strength. We've continued the collaborative assessment and management of suicide research within acute services in our access team. But one thing new that we've introduced over the last year was our MERV pilot. And a number of you will be saying, well, what on earth's MERV? MERV is the Mental Health Emergency Response Vehicle. We introduced it as part of Winter Pressures last year. And it was to support management of crisis in the community and to support our liaison and access teams. And we've committed to fund that pilot for a further 6 months in order to do a more detailed evaluation. But the signs are looking very positive. Both our mental health liaison service, headed by Lucy Spiring and based at the hospital, and our crisis home treatment team are held up as national exemplars by NHS England. Both Meridian and Pelham achieved reaccreditation with the Royal College of Psychiatry, and this is the Quality Networks Award accreditation. So congratulations to Brighton, who's actually in the room with me, and to Richard for that fantastic achievement. And also Sequoia were highly commended at the Positive Practice in Mental Health Awards. One of the new developments that we've had, and it was as a direct result of COVID, was implementing a 24/7 all-age COVID support line. And we did that in partnership. We did it in partnership with the council. We did it in partnership with the Lincolnshire Partnership Trust and with Rethink. It's been incredibly successful, providing 4 tiers of psychological support, not just to our own staff and to key workers, but to the whole of the local population. And it's something that we're committed to continue. Thanks, Ebony. Moving on to our specialist services, I've highlighted 2 here. I've highlighted eating disorder services and rehabilitation. For eating disorders, they had a bit of a move. This was one of our major estate schemes last year, where we bought Stanish Lodge and Raharian Fields relocated, and that's enabled them to develop their service. So they now have a step-down facility on site to support people in their step back towards the community. The eating disorder, Raharian, were also successful in being reaccredited under the Quality for Eating Disorder scheme with the Royal College of Psychiatry. And the team has got an eye to the future. They're really looking at how they can support people with the really complex needs in terms of eating disorder, because the way that eating disorder services are going to be commissioned is changing over the next 2 to 3 years. And to ensure that our unit remains viable and well recognised, we're continuing to develop the skills within that team so they can start to support people who have both a personality disorder and an eating disorder. The team in eating disorders have been developing new pathways for bulimia, and they've even developed a vegan pathway as well. And they move on from strength to strength. In terms of our rehabilitation services, service users and staff have been strongly engaged in developing a new model of care for our rehabilitation service, something that the CQC were very keen that we worked on. And in a few weeks' time, we'll be opening our 3rd house in the community, enabling and supporting people with complex needs to live as independent life as possible. Thanks, Ebony. Tukes remain at the heart of the organisation, and from the statistics on this slide, you will see they've been very active in 1920. 110 active members, 10,000 hours of attendance, 49 members have gained qualifications, and 4 people have been supported into employment. And let's not forget the role of the new IPS service, who works with the community teams. 29 people supported into employment, 8 of those through lockdown. And a vast majority of those people are sustaining that employment beyond 26 weeks, which I think is a fantastic testament to the work of the team. Tukes were very much at the heart of our COVID response. We couldn't have done it without Tukes, really. They redeployed staff to cover frontline services, They also responded to the needs of the wider community. So when we needed to open up an extra care home in North East Lincolnshire to support discharges from the hospital, it was our Tubes catering and domestic staff that went out there and helped Care Plus Group get that building open on time. It was a fantastic effort. They've been a big part of our, I don't know whether it was healthy, but certainly our well-being programme for staff. Baking and delivering cakes. It's known as Cake Gate because not everybody got a cake, but those of us who did get a cake were very grateful. They were very nice. They provided afternoon teas and VE Day treats, and they did that both for the staff who were working on site, but also delivering to staff working at home. And we know from the feedback from staff how well that was actually received. Also, Tube staff played a key part in our vulnerable service user support team, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on. Moving on to NAViGO Extra. Again, a very busy year for this service. They've almost doubled the amount of care hours that they've delivered in 1 year, which is unbelievable, really. And we wouldn't have anticipated that at the start of 1920. They too have invested heavily in staff development, using apprenticeships and nursing programmes to support the skills building of their staff. They work very closely with an organisation called Care for All, which is a local learning disability charity. And together, we've also bought another home care company called Ace Home Care. Through the consortium that they've developed called Changing Lives, they've been winning more contracts to provide supported living here in North East Lincolnshire. They've worked hard to ensure that during the pandemic, their service users have not been isolated. And have really signed up to the Digital Poverty Initiative. And I think what was really clever was how they brought their skills together at the start of, well, really at the peak of the pandemic. So across Care for All and NAViGO Extra, they identified their most experienced staff. And those most experienced staff became their first responder team. They were provided with enhanced PPE, and when they needed to look after somebody in the community who was COVID positive, it was that team that went in first and put in place all of the models and the protocols that could then be followed by the other support staff. And we know how well received it was by the other staff. Moving on to the Grimsby Garden Centre. Well, unlike other garden centres, ours remained open throughout the lockdown and moved to a delivery service, and really was pushing the message about the importance of horticultural therapy at this very difficult time. And in this slide, I've just given you some statistics about the level of social media activity around the garden centre. 50,000 views on Google alone since June. And I think that's a testament really to the contribution that the garden centre is seen to play in meeting the needs of the local community. They're not seen as a profit-making company. They are seen as being part of the local patch here in Grimsby and Cleethorpes. And the really good news for the garden centre is that finally, at long last, we've got the planning permission we need to continue to develop the site. And the first phase of that starts very, very shortly. We'll continue into 21, and it's the extension and development of Cafe Blue. Moving on to communications and marketing, I said at the start of the presentation that the role of the communications and marketing team has been absolutely fundamental in this particular year. Not just because of the projects that I've outlined on this slide, like the development of the new website, and if you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to have a look. Not just because of the events that they support, like World Mental Health Day and the sponsorship of the Grimsby 10K and the staff awards and the weekly bulletins, but because of the innovation that they bring to the way that they communicate with the broader public and communicate with our staff. The power of things like the We Are NAViGO video, which has been copied by many other organisations, and the use of the most recent use of the service user store is really powerful way of encouraging people to take up the help that we can provide. Thanks, Ebony. I don't want to forget the other people who contribute to the success of NAViGO, our volunteers, our members, the people who engage with the many activities and groups that we have. And I'd like to thank Kelly just for some of the information she's put together here for me that really, I think, conveys the depth of volunteering activity that takes place within NAViGO. We have over 60 volunteers now. And from this slide, you can see the range of placements that we provide across NAViGO for students, for people involved in employability schemes, as well as for volunteers themselves. And moving on, we can see some of the engagement activities that we've carried out over the last 12 months. And all of this is pre-COVID. So World Mental Health Day with a focus on talk suicide, the full range of Christmas events that are organised for our volunteers and carers, Bright Blue Monday event with Freshney, Time for a Cuppa, which was the fundraising event for Dementia UK, the provision of training around resilience, and all of the work we do for carers in our Pampers Week and the Carers Awareness Day. And also, obviously, all of our groups produce things, and particularly our crafting groups. And they, at the end of the year, they were able to donate a range of knee blankets to our older people's service. And the next slide just gives you, just conveys really in pictorial form, the range of groups that we have and which we support here in NAViGO, and which we think is really important to ensure that people do not feel socially isolated. And of course, that was a real challenge during COVID, which I'm going to talk about later. So I suppose the final chapter of 1920, and it's a chapter that continues obviously into this year, is our response to COVID. And I don't have to remind people how quickly this hit the organisation, or indeed how quickly it hit the country. And we suddenly found ourselves in March at the very highest level of our escalation plan, level 4. And we were really committed to trying to keep all of our services open, even if they all mostly had to move to a virtual approach. We were equally keen, as we went through the lockdown period, to try and step down to level 3 in our escalation plan as quickly as we could, whereby all new service users get a face-to-face assessment, and then a risk assessment is done as to whether their continued support should be face-to-face or can be done virtually. All of us have become experts in the world of Zoom and Microsoft Teams and GoToWebinars, and the pace of development and change within the NHS generally has been fantastic, really. I mean, you couldn't imagine that we'd have been able to do it. And I think there are 2 teams of particular note here that enabled us to make that transition to the virtual world so quickly. One is Lisa Denton and her team, and the other is Darren McKay and the IT team based at Care Plus Group. They were under real pressure right at the start of the pandemic to get us the equipment, to get it all up and running, so we could move our single point of access to having to work remotely, so that Open Minds reception could work remotely, so the reception for CMHT could work remotely. And we had that up and running so quickly. And I think we forget these things that we actually did right at the peak of the pandemic. But we also had to put in place a lot of COVID pathways, not just in our inpatient areas where we had to create isolation units on Meridian and in older people's, but for all of our teams, getting used to wearing PPE for 12 hours a day, marking out all our buildings with 2 meters distancing, putting in one-way systems. It was a fantastic effort by everybody involved to work in a different way and to cope with the changes that were needed to keep providing our services. There are 2 teams, I think, that I want to highlight that helped tremendously, really, and they were both new. They were both taking on a brand new role. One was our vulnerable support team, and this was a team that was put together from staff who were shielding, who were clinically vulnerable, who couldn't actually come physically into work, staff from within tubes and staff within infrastructure. And we'd identified over 350 of our service users who we deemed to be vulnerable. And this team, their job was to keep in touch with those people on a regular basis. They made thousands of phone calls. And they will say themselves that at the beginning it was very much about providing practical support, but it quickly moved on to providing emotional support. We provided food parcels, we collected prescriptions, and if anybody was concerned following a conversation with a vulnerable service user, their care coordinator was contacted. And we had some really fantastic feedback when we did a survey of our service users about how much that service had been valued and the benefit of that service. The other topic that I have to mention, because I am the queen of PPE in North East Lincolnshire, is PPE. personal protective equipment. We didn't have any, basically. The NHS decided it wasn't going to supply social enterprises, which was a bit of a shock because we'd always had our PPE from them. So very quickly, we had to identify somebody in the organisation and put a team together who would buy our PPE, store it and distribute it. And so many people involved in this effort, but Sally, Fiona, Gemma immediately spring to mind. The trouble was we ended up not just doing that for NAViGO, but we ended up doing it for every health and social care organisation in North East Lincolnshire. And I personally believe that one of the reasons why North East Lincolnshire has got the lowest number of deaths in care homes from COVID in the country is because the care homes had access to the PPE and because of the work of the infection control team at Care Plus Group. I think those two things together made a tremendous difference for local care homes. And we're actually still doing it. We are still storing and distributing PPE for all of the health and social care organisations here in North East Lincolnshire. You cannot begin to catalogue really all of the new ways of working that have been required from our staff. And for me, that made it really important that we supported our staff in terms of focusing on their health and well-being. And we put lots of things in place, psychological assistance within the workplace, making sure they can be fast-tracked onto the 24/7 helpline, putting all kinds of treats and things in place, wobble rooms. It was just really important to support our staff through this very difficult period. And one of the things that was key for me during that was around communication. So we have a weekly webinar that's open to all of our staff, headed up by the exec team, because it's very important when the national government are throwing out guidance like confetti, somebody's actually got to catch that guidance locally, translate it and say, this is what it means for us and this is what we're actually going to do. And that was our role, to make sure that staff were really clear about what we were going to do locally in response to whatever national announcement had just been made. I would summarise, I think, our COVID response by saying, for me, it was an extraordinary response from an extraordinary group of people. Our staff, our members and our volunteers. And I think it stands us in good stead, really, for what is obviously going to be one of the most challenging winters that the NHS is ever going to have to face. So I think the groundwork that we've done over the last few months will actually stand us in good stead. Coming back to that theme of communication, the next slide just sets out some of the work that our comms team have been doing to communicate out to the general public what help and advice is available for them around COVID, and to make them aware of what we're actually doing within local mental health services. And the next slide just demonstrate what the comms team have been doing around designing a lot of the stuff that we see throughout our buildings. They designed the social distancing and the infection control signage, not just for NAViGO, but also for the Grimsby Garden Centre. So I think that the team have been an integral part of our response to COVID, alongside all of our frontline teams who worked through particularly that initial stress when we were at the peak of the pandemic. We didn't know much about the disease at that time. We were learning as we were going along. It was incredibly stressful for our staff, and my heartfelt thanks to them. And the final slide is just, I talked about all the activities in the groups that we had running pre-COVID, and how it was really important that we tried to sustain those and keep in contact with people during that peak pandemic. And this slide just tells you how we've translated some of our face-to-face groups into virtual groups. And the really good news is, working under the rule of 15 or 6, we vary it depending on what the group is, we're managing to get some of these groups back up and running. But all of them have had virtual contact. We've been running Your Voice on a virtual basis. We've had crafting groups running. So we have tried our best to ensure that none of our service users are feeling isolated. They know how to engage. And that, again, we're really investing in digital poverty to ensure that people have access to the technology that they need to keep in touch during this very difficult time. So that's my story of two halves. It's been an extraordinary year. I think it's the most extraordinary year of my career in the health service. And all I can say is, for me, it is an extraordinary response by an extraordinary team. And as ever, I always remain extremely humbled and proud to be your Chief Executive. Thank you very much.
Just making sure I'm COVID protected and following the rules. The next item on our agenda is to think about the money. And our erstwhile Director of Finance, Simon Beeton, is here to do his usual presentation and talk us through the performance financially for the last year. Over to you, Simon.
Afternoon, everybody. I'll just maybe clean down on domestics, if that's okay. As Jane said, very different this year. I'm going to get a huge cheer at this point, so everybody's so excited about listening to the accounts. Welcome onto stage with a massive cheer, big fanfare for me usually, because everyone's so excited. Thank you very much, thank you, thank you, thank you. Slightly smaller cheer. Just a bit of organisation-wise for me, really, on this first. Julie has asked me, and the comms team have asked me, please take photos, please take selfies, please send them in to us, because obviously we do an AGM magazine at the end of the year, just to show everybody what's happened and how the AGM's gone. We normally all be in the same place at the same time. But unfortunately this year we're not able to be. So wherever you are, please take selfies, please take photos, and please send them into the comms team so we can gather together a picture of the AGM, even though it's been so different this year. And as Jane mentioned, I'll be looking down quite a bit because I've got my presentation in front of me. So hopefully got the first slide up, but receiving the annual accounts and reports for 2019-20, a very unusual year. But just to remind everybody, as I usually do at the start, NAViGO is now a group of companies. So we have been a group for a little while now. It gets sort of bigger and smaller as things go on, really. But we dropped NAViGO Nurseries as a company this year because we didn't need the nursery anymore, because the garden centre is now part of NAViGO. So we have the parent company, NAViGO Health and Social Care CIC. Obviously, that's the parent community interest company. But also, as Jane's mentioned, we've got NAViGO Extra, which is our trading subsidiary. And I'll come on to a little bit more activity that Jane also mentioned in a little while. So thank you for that. So the graph that I usually put up, and I'm doing a really bad analogy here, because those of you that have been around long enough will know that Grimsby Garden Centre is 5 years old on the 1st of October. It seems amazing that we've had the garden centre for 5 years, really. So NAViGO's approaching its 10th birthday, and 5 years in we decided to buy a garden centre, which at the time seemed a bit random, but certainly provided us with a lot of benefit as time's gone on. You can see there from the graph, we are a growing organisation, hence the Grow With Us title there. We started off as a £22 million organisation, and we're now over 33 million, almost 34 million pounds. So the organisation has grown by more than 50% in 9 years. And I'm not sure there's lots of organisations that can actually claim that sort of growth whilst continuing to deliver such high quality services as we have. As you can see from that graph there, there's just a little blip in the middle there where we were a bit too ambitious, and expenditure started to creep up and close in on what the income was. But I'm pleased to say over the last 3 or 4 years we've managed to arrest that position, if you like, really. And as you can see, for the last 3 years certainly we've managed to deliver a surplus, which is really healthy, and I'll come on to that a little bit in a moment. So they're preparing the soil. What have we been doing this year to prepare ourselves for the future? We've had an ambitious capital programme. We continue to have an ambitious capital programme. So using your home finances as an analogy for that, you've got your savings account and you've got your current account. I think I do this all the time. What have we been using the savings account for? So what is it that we've been doing that makes the organisation more sustainable into the future? And as Jane mentioned in her presentation, this year we've purchased shares in Ace Home Care. So we are now part owners of Ace Home Care with Care for All. So we bought 50% of the shares and Care for All bought 50% of the shares. And that adds to our portfolio of trading opportunities, really, and the work that we're doing together with Care for All, NAViGO Extra and Ace Home Care will stand the organisation in good stead going forward. We've done quite a lot of work enhancing System 1. System 1 was a huge project that we undertook a couple of years ago. And we continue to develop System 1 so that it's more user-friendly for you guys out there on the front line. And we're working to develop that system more and more and more so that you can use it more effectively to deliver care and hopefully free up time to care. So you're not spending all your time tapping information into a system. You're actually able to deliver the care that we all aspire to. Again, as Jane mentioned, we opened the Janine Smith Suite. That was actually during 1920. There seems to be so much water that's gone under the bridge since then. It was actually during 1920. I think it was June, was it? June 19? Yeah, June 19. It seems to have been part of the portfolio for so long now. So obviously the final completion of that, the bills came in for that. So we've done that. We commenced renovations of this lovely facility that we're in now, the ground floor of NAViGO House, and that finished in this financial year, obviously 2021. It's not been cheap, but it's certainly been worth it, and it saves us quite a lot of money. So in terms of where that project came from, why did we invest that money in the ground floor of NAViGO House? It's so that we got out of rented accommodation. We were renting accommodation both in Grimsby and in Cleethorpes, and we've obviously been able to come out of those properties and move into one that we own ourselves, so it makes complete financial sense to do so. We've also completed elsewhere in the ground floor of NAViGO House. We've also completed Safe Space, we've completed Simply You, and we run Safe Space in tandem with it being a cafe as well. So hopefully you've had a chance to use the cafe, and we finished all that work off during 1920 as well. And also we completed the purchase of Stanage Lodge, as Jane said, and we've turned that into Rarian Fields, which we're all very proud of, and is now coming into its own. And as Jane mentioned, there's plenty of expansion opportunities there with Rarian Fields. So on to sowing new seeds. So we've prepared the ground, and what is it that we're doing now, and what investments have we had? Again, all of these I think Jane mentioned, but it's worth mentioning that we are putting money into our services to try and develop them on a year-by-year basis. Further expansion of IAP services, our Open Minds colleagues, the government are pushing for more and more IAP-based services, and so obviously we've put further expansion money into there, as Jane mentioned, with new trainees and enhancing the capacity and things that we've got in there, so that's been really positive. Investment into perinatal mental health services. As Jane mentioned again, we've invested in perinatal mental health services. Now we have a service for mainly for ladies at the moment, but there are plans afoot, which I know Mike's involved in at the moment, about maternal mental health, which might involve fathers and other things as well. So that's a growing piece of work that we'll be doing. There'll be more money coming for perinatal, and there might also be more money on its way for maternal mental health services as well. Enhancement of our crisis and liaison services. We're about to launch in 3 days' time, I think, on the 1st of October. We're at further expansion of our liaison services to become a 24/7 mental health liaison service, working with colleagues at Diana, Princess of Wales. And obviously we've been able to expand our crisis provision as well, which has been really positive. We managed to secure the funding to continue Safe Space scheme. So Safe Space was a trial scheme at the time when we launched it. We've managed to secure the money to do that and continue that, and we've now run that 5 days a week. We run that 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, on an evening. So that's continuing to run because we've managed to secure the finances and prove that it was a worthwhile business case. The mental health emergency response vehicle, again, that's something that we've developed locally. We are one of the first in the country, I think, to develop a mental health emergency response vehicle. And as Jane says, we're going through the process of proving that's worth now. And there's lots of eyes on that service, actually, both regionally and nationally, about how that service goes and whether it can be expanded to other areas. We've opened additional bed-based services in older adults, not only in the Konar suite, but also, as you know, the Janine Smith suite is open, full, now has a waiting list. We're now looking at other options of what we can do to further expand older adult services. So we're in the very early stages of that at the moment, but watch this space around older adults because the demand is not going away. So we need as an organisation to think how we respond to that. And new employability services. This seems to be a government push at the moment, is to try and get people with mental health problems into employment. So there's a number of employment services that have been developed over the last 12 to 18 months or so. There's obviously the Employment Advisors Service within Open Minds. We've also had the launch of the individualised placement and support service which is based within TUPES, but actually works closely with the community mental health team. And obviously we've got the existing TUPES function. So it seems to make sense to us that those start to work very closely together. Anybody who turns up, you know, the NAViGO way, anybody who turns up at the front door, there will be no closed door to us. So if you're not appropriate for an employment advisor support service and you're not appropriate for IPS, we will find a way to get you educated, trained, employed, whatever it is that you want to do, and make sure that we can meet the goals that each individual service user has. So that's where we've been sort of sowing new seeds. Tending the garden is a really bad analogy, sorry. I've just sort of tried to find things that are sort of garden related and just stick it on the top of the slide. There you go. So in terms of Grimsby Garden Centre, as I mentioned, I'll come on to it. You might see the bisocial logo go around the organisation quite a lot more. That's an initiative that's been run by our colleagues at Social Enterprise UK, which we're a member of. There are more and more and more social enterprises coming on stream in the UK now. It seems to be a really popular business model. The main reason behind that bisocial is that if you're buying from a social enterprise, obviously, as you all know, as members of the organisation, that any profit that organisation makes goes back into the organisation and not into shareholders' pockets and second hands in the Bahamas and other things like that. So that's why the bisocial logo and stamp is there, and it's spreading across the organisation. COVID cost us just missing the £1 million turnover mark this year. If you remember, we had a big fanfare last year because we'd hit the £1 million turnover. Obviously, the shutdown with COVID couldn't really have come at a worse time for the garden centre, although we didn't shut down and we did maintain an online presence, as Jane said. The amount of people that come through our door in March and April and May when the sun comes out and the garden starts needing to be tended is massive. And obviously we missed a chunk of that income, but we still very nearly hit the £1 million turnover mark. And as Jane says, we've got hugely ambitious new plans for the garden centre. I would suggest that you have a look. If you haven't had a look, the plans that we've got for the garden centre, they're really quite exciting, different, new, environmentally friendly, lots of other things that you would expect from an organisation with our sort of ethics and values. Respect Training Solutions goes from strength to strength despite the lockdown. One of the first organisations in the country to meet the new Build accreditation standards, that's the British Institute of Learning Disabilities, and we continue to get lots and lots of inquiries from organisations, not only within mental health, in acute services and other places as well, about how they can adopt Respect Training Solutions. So it's an area where we have a new appointment that's just coming into post next month, a business development post really within the Respect team, which will see us hopefully grow that service and start to develop quite a lot of income and training delivery from that. NAViGO Extra, Jane covered that very well in terms of what's happening with NAViGO Extra. Obviously, although NAViGO Extra made a small loss this year, trading wise, that's because we were expecting that, and it's because we were sort of laying the foundations, if you like, for NAViGO Extra to grow. We bought half of Ace Home Care. We're working closely with Care for All, and so NAViGO Extra, I think, finds itself at the minute in a really good position to build from where they are now. So it's something that we're really keen to work much closer with NAViGO Extra and develop them further. Ace Home Care, as I mentioned, our newest addition. The 50% share, I think it's fair to say what we tried to do with Ace Home Care is obviously Care for All as a learning disability charity have learning disability specialty as their core. NAViGO Extra, obviously mental health because it's based within our organisation, and Ace Home Care pick up the general physical health and domiciliary care element. So all of those things together makes sense as a partnership in terms of we can fulfil any needs that come up really. So that was the idea behind Ace Home Care, to strengthen the partnership and also to add to the portfolio of services that we've got. Simply You, hopefully many of you have been and seen Simply You. It's now downstairs here at NAViGO House. Liz and Joe continue some excellent work there. Lots of work through occupational health, and they've always got a smiling face and a cup of tea for you if you come down to Simply You. And we want to expand that further. You know, now we're out of lockdown to a certain extent, although we're back in lockdown another week, who knows? But now they're open and trading again. We'll be looking at the breadth of services they deliver and hopefully expanding those. Not only have Lisa and the team been working hard to support us with System 1 and other things, but as one of the later adopters of System 1 as an organisation, if you like, there's lots of people who were on System 1 before us. We've probably, fair to say, developed System 1 and implemented it better than most other organisations in the country have, because they're part of a national user group, so they understand that. And that came to the attention of colleagues at St Andrew's Hospice, and they've asked us if we would go and support them with their development of System 1 in terms of what the data warehouses and hopefully the clinician dashboards and all things that you're all using out there on a day-to-day basis. So we are working in partnership with St Andrew's Hospice to do that. And the cafes, with the exception of Cafe Blue obviously being attached to a garden centre, cafes don't tend to make us a massive amount of money. They do well if they break even financially, and it's incumbent on us really. If you want to keep the cafes open, please continue to go there. I think and spend your money there. You know, the Bisocial logo's there for a reason. It makes sense. If you're going to spend your money with your own employing organisation, because it comes back and it ultimately pays your salary at the end of the day. The profit that's made out of there, as I mentioned, doesn't go into shareholders' pockets. It helps us to sustain the organisation. So that's just a quick whistle through our trading operations. So onto the detail of the numbers then, in terms of where we were this year. As I mentioned earlier, our total income nearly topped the £34 million this year, so 33.75 roughly million, so £33.75 million of income. It costs us £32.8 million to raise that income, so we made a surplus this year of just shy of £1 million, which I think is a really, really good number to aim at for an organisation of our size. We're not a huge margin making organisation. That's not what we're here for. We're here to provide services for people, but we have to be sustainable as an organisation. So as I bemoan every year, we also have to pay the taxman some money, because even though we are doing good and a social enterprise and things, the taxman still wants his share of any surplus that we make, which is unfortunate, but it's the world we live in. So we're expecting that bill to be around £250,000. That's subject to full confirmation later on in the year when the taxman comes and has a review of us. But we're expecting that to be about £250,000, which means we were able to add over £600,000 into our reserves this year, which, as I mentioned, I think is a really healthy position for an organisation of our size. What that does then is, so that's the in-year position, that's what we did in 1920, and then that adds to our sort of savings account position, if you like. So the next slide takes us onto our savings account position. You can see there at the end of the year, we've got £5.4 million of cash in the bank, which is a significant sum of money. We do owe quite a lot of that money out. You can see a couple of lines further down where it says creditors. Creditors are £5.6 million, so they sort of offset each other. We've always got a chunk of money in the chunk of cash in the bank. Kev and the team make sure of that we're not spending more than we've got, but keeping an eye on who we owe money to at the same time. Other assets that we've got, so that's the value of our buildings and things like that, and as well as adding in people that owe us money, debtors and things like that. So that's 6.7 million, which means in total we own around £12 million worth of assets in inverted commas, but we owe £6.6 million out of that to various people. So the long-term borrowing is things like money that we borrowed from the bank to buy the garden centre, things like that. And so you can see there our share capital and reserves leaves us a balance of just over £5.5 million, which again, for an organisation of our size is a really healthy position to be in, but it enables us to embark on quite ambitious capital programmes like we do. So as a director of finance, I'm relatively comfortable with that position. I don't think we're holding too much money. It's always a difficult balance of holding too much money and then not holding enough money. And that position is endorsed by the board as well, that we have got enough. We are okay. We're okay for the rainy day, the COVID-style rainy days that come along, but we're also not holding too much money in reserve. So that's a positive position for us. And again, some of this Jane has mentioned as well. We're not waiting for COVID to go away. So the position about what we're doing and how we're moving forward. So that gives you a snapshot of where we were. This is how we're moving forward. And we've got really, really ambitious plans for the future. So there's a huge expansion of our mental health liaison service on the way, as I mentioned, starting this week. We're looking at more rehabilitation houses for people of a working age. So we've got a property that we're renovating at the minute in partnership with the landlord on Dudley Street to provide rehabilitation accommodation for people with mental health problems. Further investment into early intervention services, again, something that Jane mentioned. Further expansion of perinatal services as the money comes in through national and regional routes. Primary care networks, a new thing around primary care, furthering our partnerships with them, and our teams are working very closely now with primary care networks and GPs in order to develop services that integrate between that boundary of primary and secondary care services, really. 24/7 advice line. We set it up during COVID. Is it here to stay? It's certainly getting a lot of footfall, if you like, footfall on the telephone, but you know what I mean. Lots and lots of people taking part in that and availing themselves of that. So is it here to stay? We're certainly working to try and make that a reality. Working with colleagues in the acute hospitals, we set up a psychological first aid service with colleagues at Diana Princess of Wales Hospital, right across their patch actually in North Lincolnshire and in North East Lincolnshire as well, and we'd like to continue to do that further as well. We've launched the Veterans Mental Health Project, that's the project of the year from last year, so I think it's in the last couple of days we've just had approval for that research project that Zafra and the psychology team are taking on. We continue to develop System 1 further, and we have got a real now focus on digital. As Jane mentioned, the acceleration of digitally enabling our services over the last 6 months is unprecedented, and it's something that we couldn't foresee coming, but it's something that we're trying to get on top of and certainly push our services forward. And as I've mentioned already, the improvements that we're doing at Grimsby Garden Centre. So I think they started on site today, I think, actually, doing the work at the cafe. So that work is already starting. So where are we? Just in summary, as an organisation financially, we're an organisation that continues to grow. We continue to diversify. So, you know, any opportunities we're willing to have a look at as an organisation to try and spread our impact really within the communities that we serve. We continue to be in surplus, and I don't see that changing this year. We're in a very strong position already for the first sort of half of this year because we've been reimbursed for our COVID costs. So we continue to be an organisation that's operating in surplus. As hopefully you've heard from both Jane and I, we've got exciting plans for the future of our services and new trading opportunities. Is there something we can do working with colleagues in the acute sector? The workplace wellbeing things that we've done with psychological first aid have been really positive. We continue to work with our colleagues over in the United States around the collaborative assessment and management of suicidality, and we're just at the point of signing a contract with them where we will be the sole deliverer of that training in the UK. So that could be another income generator. And as I've mentioned, the partnership with St Andrews might mean that we're also digital leaders locally as well. And I think it's fair to say we need to continue to work in partnership with both organisations that are sort of smaller than us and that we can support and be an anchor institution for, but also organisations that are larger than us and play our role in the emerging integrated care systems and STP agenda that's playing out. So I commend the accounts to you for approval. Really, I think it's put us in a really, really strong position. And that's it from me, other than to say, obviously, because we've made a surplus this year, what we would normally be doing now is we'd be putting our orange voting chips in tubes and finding out which is the project of the year this year. Logistically, that's been very difficult to achieve this year. We are now at the AGM, because of COVID and everything coming on top of us, really. We're going to launch a project of the year scheme now at the AGM now. What we want people to do is think of the ideas that they would have put forward for a project of the year. By the 16th of October, just a simple paragraph or very brief overview of what it is, outlining the concept of your project so that we can have a look at it. That will then be filtered through to our business development team, who will then work with anybody who's put a bid forward. And by the 24th of November, they'll work with you to sort of pad that out and turn it into a full application, if you like, which will then be reviewed by senior management team. Senior management team will then review those worked up schemes and decide which ones, yes, this is one that we should take forward. Actually, this is one that we should just put on the work plan straight away and just crack on with, because we've had projects like that in the future, and which ones maybe we need to have a little bit of a rethink about and a bit of a pause. That all then culminates with a decision and a discussion at membership board on the 3rd of December. And the membership board will then review all of those schemes and hopefully narrow them. Well, they'll have to narrow them down to 6, even though we haven't got 6 tubes. Oh, but we'll have to put it in. Well, 6 is the number. 6 is the number. That's the maximum number of projects we can cope with. So we'll have 6 projects then for shortlisting, and then the voting period for that is yet to be defined. But it'll be something similar along the proxy votes line, I would think, if we're still in lockdown. And then in January of next year, around the middle of January, I think next year, we'll be in a position to launch the winner of this year's project of the year. So sorry, it's a strange and different process this year, but obviously we have made enough surplus to warrant a project of the year, and we didn't want not to have a project of the year. So we're kicking it off today. But if you need any support, please just come to us and we'll let you know, and we'll reiterate those timelines and get them out through our comms channels. So that's all from me. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Thank you, Simon. Don't you love him? We're very fortunate, actually, because we've got a Director of Finance who's more passionate about the services we provide than the money. And that is really unique, because normally Directors of Finance are and having a finance background myself, Directors of Finance are very blinkered and normally only think about the money. And he talked about how we've grown as an organisation over 10 years. I mean, I came here in November 2010 for 6 months to help set the organisation up, but it's in my blood now. But reflecting back to where we were and where we are now, Simon talked about how financially stable we are. I can remember in about February of 2011, before we set NAViGO going, organising all of the bank statements, and Simon and I got the signatories all sorted out, and we had no money in the bank on the 1st of April 2011. So we actually started NAViGO with nothing in the bank, and we had to go to the CCG and ask them if they would give us 3 months of our contract income in advance so we could pay our staff. And if you look at where we were then and where we are now financially and in terms of the services we've developed, I think it's a credit to everybody connected with the organisation. So don't get an anorak, Simon. Stay as you are and think about the services. Right then, I've got to take us through a bit of formal business now. So bear with me as I look down to my agenda. We have got some resolutions that we need to formally get through today's meeting. And normally, I would be asking you, all 300 of you in the audience normally, to show your voting cards to say whether you have agreed or disagreed with the resolutions. But this year, all voting has been by proxy, and Julie Gray, who is our company secretary here, is sitting beside me with the results of the votes. In order to be legal, I have to go through each resolution and ask Julie to tell me on the votes cast. So we'll just do that formally to keep the business legal. So there are 2 ordinary resolutions. The first one is to receive the financial statements for the year ended 31st of March 1920. In fact, I'll ask Julie, the votes cast for? 98 for, against 0, and withheld 0. So the financial accounts for the end of 31st of March are approved. And our second resolution is one which enables us to issue shares to our staff, and we have to renew our authority to do this every 5 years. So this resolution enables us to continue issuing shares to staff because our staff own this company. They are the owners of NAViGO. So if I ask Julie for the votes cast for the resolution, 98, and the votes cast against, 0, and any abstentions, 0. So that resolution is also carried by the membership. And we have one special resolution, and this is a complicated resolution because it involves rewriting the rules which govern the organisation. Details of this were sent out with the AGM calling papers. So this resolution is that the articles of association shall be amended in accordance with the details which were set out with the calling papers for the meeting. So I think I have votes for 98, votes against 0, and any abstentions, no. Then we have 2 resolutions which are put to the AGM, and these can only be put by the membership because the membership have control of the appointment of the chairman and the chief executive. So I'll take the first of these, and then I'll step down because the next resolution actually involves me personally. So the first resolution is that Jane Lewington is reappointed as chief executive for a term of up to 2 years, ending with the annual general meeting in 2022. So I'm ask Julie again, votes for, 98, votes against, 0, and any withheld, no. And the next resolution concerns my appointment, so I need to step aside from the podium and ask Jane if she'll take the responsibility for that. Thank you, Jane.
I haven't got the details of the resolution in front of me. So have you got that? Place it just there. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. So the second resolution is that Tom, or number 2 things, is reappointed as chairman for 1 year, ending with the annual general meeting in 2021. So Julie votes for 97, votes against 1, and any abstentions, none. So that resolution is duly passed. Resolution passed. Tom.
Thank you, Jane. I have no idea what the vote was as I left the room. I'm delighted to continue as your chairman for one last year. It was my intention to retire in September of this year, but because of all that happened over the summer, trying to find a successor would have been really difficult. Okay, so looking at my agenda, I'm moving on to the next item, which is to introduce 2 of my colleagues. We have a theme running through this year's AGM, which is cultural diversity. And that's really important to us here. And it's important to us as a family of NAViGO. Our NAViGO family comprises a wide range of individuals. They come from many countries and cultures, and they enrich our organisation. And we welcome them all. We welcome them all as members of our NAViGO family. Without them, NAViGO would be a much poorer place. They enrich our organisation, and they help us to support services which we'd have real difficulty in supporting if they were not part of our workforce. So I'm pleased to introduce Brighton, Nyamunga and Machemba, who will give an introduction to our theme for the next 2 days, cultural diversity. Thank you, Brighton.
Just bear with me, I'm just going to do the section control. I welcome you all to this segment of Celebrating Diversity Strategy Launch. My name is Brighton Nyamunga. I'm a clinical lead in one of the inpatient area, and I'm here with my colleague Machemba. Would like to take this opportunity to thank NAViGO as an organization, in particular Tom, our chair, Jane, our COE, and Mike, our Director of Operations, for supporting us in steering this strategy. Today, we're going to talk about, it's about setting the scene about this strategy. So we're going to cover why we need to celebrate diversity as an organization. And also we're going to cover the aims of celebrating diversity. And then I think it is important for everyone to know what is diversity really mean. So also we're going to cover the impact of diversity in mental health, because from my experience coming from a different region, the impact of diversity to mental health problems varies with regions. We're also going to discuss about how we're going to develop this strategy and our implementation plan, and also where we're going to start from. So next slide, please. So I'll start by exploring the reasons why we need to celebrate diversity as an organization. Celebrating diversity enables us to learn from each other. Through experience, I've personally noticed that mental health varies across communities. Therefore, this strategy will focus in educating each other so that our services will deliver the service that is inclusive. Before I ask my colleague to come into the podium, we're just going to play you a pictorial video, small pictorial video to reflect how diverse we are in NAViGO. It's unfortunately that due to the limitations of the pandemic, we were unable to capture every employee, but we've done what we could at the moment. So, Leah.
Just bear with me.
Thank you, Brighton. My name is Machemba. I'm a cognitive behavioral psychotherapist at Open Minds. Thank you all for joining us in this launch of Celebrating Diversity in NAViGO. Our sincere gratitude also go to all our respective management teams for their invaluable support. So in the next two slides, I'm going to talk to you about why we are celebrating diversity, the aims of celebrating diversity. NAViGO employs from all over the world. So we came up with this proposal because we believe that as a culturally sensitive organization, it is important to recognize the diversities of our workforce and the community that we serve. Therefore, celebrating cultural diversity within NAViGO is intended to raise cultural awareness and recognition of our cultural differences. Next slide, please. Celebrating diversity, therefore, is to enable different cultures to not only understand each other, but also accept each other's cultural values and beliefs, as well as respect and tolerate such cultural differences. We know that diversity is a whole that is greater than the sum of its parts. As human beings, we are revealed and make ourselves known to one another by infinite varieties of intelligence, language, race, values, politics, religion, gender presentation, philosophy, and a host of other elements common to humankind. Therefore, celebrating diversity in NAViGO provides an environment where such diverse perspectives, cultures, and values are accepted and appreciated. This recognition of a common humanity by NAViGO is the first step in the celebration of our differences, differences that inform our cultures, our values, our minds, and all our ways of being in the world. As such, celebrating our differences becomes strength in a collaborative effort. I'm now passing you on to Brighton, who is going to talk to you about what is diversity. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Liam. So we thought it is important for us to give an idea of what do we really mean by diversity. I know we've been talking about cultural, but diversity holds a distinct meaning for different people. It doesn't relate to cultural. It includes different sexual orientations, bisexual, the transgender community, people who are physically disabled, people with autism, or people with learning disabilities. Next slide, please. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about the impact of diversity in mental health. The difference influences the way in which communities talk about mental health and how the members of the community access the services. Therefore, it is important to note how diversity impacts individuals' identity and their experience of mental health. So with this strategy, we, as I said before, we'll be educating each other. So through that education, we'll be in a position to have an understanding on how the impact of diversity to people's mental health. I'm going to pass you back to Liam, who is going to talk about initiatives of celebrating diversity.
In terms of the initiatives for celebrating diversity, celebrating diversity helps people to deal with cultural differences in a way that's not judgmental. It helps us to be open-minded and also to adopt multiple perspectives. This has a positive impact on how we communicate with our colleagues and our community that we serve. I would like to share with you what one of the educationists referred to as windows and mirrors in relation to celebrating diversity. What this means is that in a society that does not embrace cultural diversity, when the ethnic minorities look in that society, all they see is windows. However, in a society that embraces cultural diversity, when the ethnic minorities look in that society, they see mirrors, they see reflections of themselves in that society. This gives them a sense of recognition in that society, a sense of being accepted and belonging to that society. And this has a positive impact, both psychologically and socially. These people tend to be happy social subjects, and they are more likely to perform better at work as well. On that aspect, I'm passing you on now to Brighton to talk about our strategy development. Next slide, please.
Thank you. So with what Liam has just said about, for us to, when we look through the windows, for us to get that reflection of ourselves, we thought we need to develop this strategy so that we can learn from each other as an organization, so that it can help us to deliver the service that, that fits with NAViGO's values of being inclusive. So with that, I think for the organization to give us this opportunity to come up with this strategy, I think we're going to learn more from each other and be able to deliver the service that fits with NAViGO's values. So now I'm going to pass you back to Liam to talk about how we're going to implement the strategy within our services.
Next slide, please. Thank you, Brighton. In terms of our implementation strategy, we have breakdown of our workforce in terms of ethnicity. We got this from the workforce. We are going to seek out volunteers for the role of ethnic leads from each ethnic group. We will, as a group, formulate a calendar for these events. So that means we are going to decide in those meetings what country is going to present and when is that going to be. So those appointed ethnic leads will then lead their projects. Our intention is to have these events every 4 months. Thank you. I'm now going to pass you on to Brighton to talk about the starting point and the conclusion of this launch strategy.
Thank you.
Next slide, please.
Thank you once again. So since we have decided, we have been given the opportunity to launch the strategy within NAViGO's AGM, we thought we need to start by giving our colleagues a spotlight on Zimbabwe. So I'm calling you all who are watching today to tune in tomorrow, where we're going to give you a cultural background of Zimbabwe from pre-colonial era to independence. We're going to discuss about Zimbabweans' religion, staple food, point of interest, and tourism. People might be wondering why would want to know all about this when probably they were not going to go to Zimbabwe. So I think having that background knowledge, background is important to depict how the person is. And again, we're going to finish the launch with discussing the perceptions of mental health in Zimbabwe, prominent mental health illnesses in Zimbabwe, how it presents, and the treatment pathways. Again, we're going to do that because we are here as the minority group, and the minority is growing. People from Zimbabwe will be coming through our services that will help us to deliver the service as well as an organization. So I hope this information will be really valuable and will help the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Brighton and Liam, for that. And it is really kind of appropriate that we launch this strategy today, given some of the things that are happening in our nation at the moment. And as I said before you came to speak, we are a nation of many cultures and races, and we embrace them all. They bring their unique contribution to our organisation. And without them, NAViGO would be a much worse place to work in. So thank you for that. That brings us almost to a close of today's events, other than for me to tell you what's coming in the next couple of days. Tomorrow, there will be a series of seminars beginning at 11 a.m. when we will talk again about diversity with some representatives from the Royal College of Psychiatry. At noon, there will be a presentation on suicide prevention. At 1 o'clock, we will announce the winner of the service area video competition. At 1:30, there will be a presentation on the 24/7 COVID dedicated support line. And at 2 p.m, as Brighton has already highlighted, there will be spotlight on Zimbabwe. So we ask you all to think about joining us for these seminars tomorrow. You can log on through the website. They will be broadcast through YouTube. And thank goodness the technology seems to have held up today. So thank you all for tuning in today. We hope to see you at the seminars tomorrow, and I hope to see you on Thursday back here at 12:30 when we will announce the presentation and the winners of the Chairman's Award and the Community Membership Awards. So tune in tomorrow, and we hope to see you all on Thursday at 12:30. Thank you very much.